Hello and welcome to the BuildASoil YouTube channel. This is FAQ number 4 for season 3. This is going to be the last FAQ for this season. Let's just get started. As usual, I've got a list of questions here that I've not read before. They were picked from your guys' questions. So I'm going to flip it, read it, and get going. So Austin says, do trichomes continue to ripen slightly after the chop? I swear I've had buds like 50% amber, and then months down the road I scope the buds in jars and they're like completely amber. Anyone have anything on this? So I don't have an exact answer for you, but I do know this. The degradation of the trichome, when it turns amber, it's oxidizing, it's dying, it's finishing its life cycle. And when I have herb that has been, maybe the jar got hit by sun, or maybe it's old, as you said, typically there's a conversion, and I think that there's two factors at play. One is, I'm with you, I believe you're getting a lot more amber because you're getting oxidization, you're getting degradation, and that's converting. I don't think that means that it's like alive and ripening. I think that means that it's just decaying. I also don't know if it's actually changing or if that's just the appearance. I've not done enough research. I'm not an expert on this, but I would say that that's more than likely because everything is oxidizing and degrading a little bit. And then the twofold thing that I mentioned is I've noticed that many people notice that older herb is more sedative. And it could be because it's ambering up more, but more than likely what's happening is there's that conversion to CBN, which is different and people do use for sleep, and there is some medicinal value. So it does make sense that making like an edible or something from older herb may have a more sedative effect. And that degradation is caused by heat, which I think is definitely different than just aging, but it also happens over time. And so normally what we do to activate the THC is we light it on fire. That's heat, but I feel like it can slowly activate, slowly change over time. As far as do they continue to ripen slightly after the chop, I'm gonna say it's more like degrading, not ripening after the chop as if like you're letting the steak rest for a few minutes so that it gets its juices balanced. Once we chop, we've chopped, and we wanna optimize the window for harvest right as when it's ready. We don't wanna predict some sort of ripening after the fact. But I do believe that once we chop, they do start to degrade a little bit, and there probably is a little bit of ripening, and that's part of the scenario. The other part is you can look at all sorts of different parts of the plant and see different levels of it, so take it for what it's worth. That's my opinion. All right, next one. Jordan says, when trying to slow down the growth of the moms, what is your light cycle or PAR? Really good question. So PAR is similar to like seedlings, and so I'm in that 150 to 300 range. I'm not trying to drive them into a growth where they're like running. I want them to kind of slowly crawl or walk. And it's not necessarily a problem. Like if I turn up the light a little bit and I'm actively manicuring them and feeding them consistently, I can keep them healthy while they continue to grow. But in living soil, eventually you're gonna come to a place where if you continue to speed up the growth and you have discipline and you're able to manicure it and feed it, you're creating extra work for no reason, and it's going to get root bound, and then you're gonna have to take that, cut off some of the soil if you wanna keep the same container size. Cut off some of the roots so there's room for more new soil, put the new soil in. You can only fit so much in top dressing, and you can only feed so much before it needs new roots to continue its healthy life. And so knowing that, that's why I like to slow them down until I need the cuts. It just makes a lot of sense to me. And so to do it, there's a number of ways. You can lower the PAR, you can raise the lights. The other thing is because I'm slowing it down, you just gotta be aware of the lower requirement for watering at that point, the lower requirement for nutrition at that point. And if you back everything off, you should be able to keep them more in slow grow mode for months, as opposed to where you might have to do 10 times that work in those months to keep them as healthy. So as far as light cycle goes, I usually like to have my moms at 18 hours of light. And so for me, it's about the DLI. On a mom plant, I want it to be really gentle. I don't want it to flower, so I want enough light to really keep it from triggering. One of the things you'll notice about these plants is you might have a favorite that has been perfect this whole time, but for whatever reason, when it gets root bound, it starts to trigger some hormonal responses, and it can also start to like re-veg in your mom tent, even though it didn't go to flower, but it kind of did because it got stressed. So to avoid that, I like to make sure that we're not forcing them into a wall, if that makes sense. And when you're running 24 hours of light, it's more possible that those finicky ones can get a little bit upset. I like to give them that 18 hours so it's enough light. I like to let them have that downtime. And one of the things you'll hear about cannabis is they don't require a downtime. But with living soil, I feel like that downtime is when the plant is feeding sugars to the soil and doing its communication work. And so 18 hours and a low par, whatever that means to you. We just want to keep it where it's really gentle on them. Under 300 is probably best. Next from there, if you are growing moms, you have the light too far away, it's on a really low par, they can get a little bit lanky. And so I like to keep them trimmed back and keep them of a good size so that when it's time to flip, I'm not flipping from a big lanky floppy thing, I'm flipping from a smaller bonsai that has new growth on it that explodes from the woodiness of it into like really healthy clones. All right, next one, Silly Willy. Silly Willy. Hi, when I harvest, I put them in total darkness for 2 days. Then I go in only with the green light on and chop them down and hang them. My question is, am I wasting my efforts with the darkness theory? Yes. And ditch the green light and don't use it. And I don't mean to be rude about it, but I think that everybody that's new will get a green light because we want to go in when lights are off. I say it's just better never to do that. I don't believe the green light is good enough. Some plants can react to that. However, if it's minimal and it is weak and it's not done as part of your routine, I think it's totally fine. And a green light might be the only way some people during a certain schedule can deal with things. I would just encourage you to find a better way. Find a way where right when lights are on, you can go in there. Or right before lights are on and you open the tent and let some ambient light in there just a little bit so you can work. That way you're doing your watering when they have the whole day. It's kind of like feeding them breakfast. They need their water, they need to get ready for the day. If they need any nutrition or attention, it's better than at the end of the day when they're tired and they've already been beaten up by the environment. So consider that. Green lights, I don't like that much. I just feel like we've learned a lot more about the full spectrum and the fact that the plant can utilize all the light regardless, and it could have some effect. I don't have a scientific answer for you. It could be just that the green light you have has a scratch on the bulb, or the green headlamp you have is a slightly different spectrum than we know is perfect. And so too many variables, I prefer just to completely not mess with it. The next thing is darkness for 2 days, right? So consider a few things here. I know that when we're talking about medicinal herbs on farming, a lot of times we're trying to harvest in the morning. And a lot of the reason is not because it's like dark out, but because it's dark out, it's not hot, which means you can work. And we're talking about farm labor, and the plants get wilty in the heat. And so everything that has to do with farming has to do with logistics and timing. And the best way to do that is when it's cold out and you can get stuff fresh before it starts to lose its turgor and value. And whether it's lettuce, herbs, any of it, it seems to be better when it's not in the middle of the day, when it's hot and things are pumping. But to take that so far as to say that I'm gonna put it in darkness for 2 days, we have to ask ourselves what we're trying to do, what we're trying to accomplish. And so for me, I have to have some logic for me to continue to do it. But I also don't want to say that you shouldn't try it. I've tried everything, and most of the time I don't need logic when I'm new to something. I just want to try it all. I want to establish my own reason so that in the future I can really apply logic, knowing I've been there, done that, and at least I have some semblance of experience. And so I encourage you, try it. But here's what I do know. It took the entire 60, 70, 80, 90 days to develop these trichomes. I don't think that turning the lights off for 2 days is going to invigorate a response that allows you to have extra THC or extra trichomes, because anything that starts to develop at the end is gonna be 2 days old, not 70 days old. And anything that is already on the plant that's already in a harvestable window should be harvested when it's ready, and there's not an extra couple of days of darkness that's gonna change that experience. So I prefer to use that dark time to hang the plants upside down. There's another one that I hear, some people like to force them into flower by giving them 1 or 2 days of darkness before they go into flower. You can really stress your plants out doing that in a way that could cause problems for certain genetics. So take it with a grain of salt. The BuildASoil way is to mimic nature. It doesn't go dark for 2 days. I don't think there's any benefit the plant can pull out in 48 hours to give us like some supreme edition of itself. And anytime I think you find yourself as a new grower saying, you know what, this one thing is gonna really like change it up for me, it just hasn't proven to be true. Genetics are the most important. The grow environment's the next most important to that. And then lastly, we get to like the soil and the amendments. But if you have shit genetics in a bad environment, BuildASoil can't really help you. So we rely on the genetics and the environment to be the most important. And if you do that, you're gonna have great results. That being said, if you're like worried about weather and you don't have time, I guess you could kill the lights and it may not hurt it, right? Because let's say it's too hot, you're in the summer, you're not gonna have time to harvest for another day. You could just pull the plug on your lights and then tend to it the next day. But part of me feels like they're getting stale in soil in there with the lights off, and I just don't like that. So that's my answer. Adam, when is the latest you can clone? There is no latest. what I mean by there's no latest is even if you fully flower the plant, you can re-veg it. Taking a late clone is very much like re-vegging. And if you do take a late clone, even with flowers on it, it's very likely that it will root if it's a healthy plant. And what I would do is if I had something that looked like it was going to be a keeper and I did not keep it yet, and I'm mad at myself, and I'm 4 or 5 weeks in, 6 weeks in, and there's flowers everywhere. A lot of times the lowers have a lot less flower on it, and I'll take several of those in an attempt to try and get those to root. And I'll say that at least 60% of the time you can get these late ones to root just the same as anything else. It might take a little bit more babying, a little bit longer time to throw the roots because it's in a hormonally different spot. If you get it with a flower on there to not kind of rot while it's in the clone dome and you get it to root and strike and the roots are growing, now you have to transition that when it's going to be confused hormonally and you're going to put it into 24 hours of light or 18 hours of light and it's going to have new roots and it's going to be trying to grow out of it. And now it's going to pop single leaf growth and it's going to transition hormones into a full re-veg. And that re-veg could mean that your clone sits there growing new roots and you have to really baby feeding it and watering it so because it's not going to explode with roots like a normal one. It can take a little bit longer. And during that little bit longer, things can go wrong if you overwater it or you get lazy with it. So just be attentive. And normally what will happen is that nug will start to turn into single, double, triple, bam, full vegetative growth and you've got your keeper now. So not going to say it's not hard, but it's totally doable. Worst case, even if you fail there, you could harvest your plant, hack it back and do a full re-veg if you really wanted to. Then you could take clones off of it later. So many answers there. James says, when you harvest, do you let your soil dry all the way out before you cut down your plant or does it matter? No, I don't. A lot of people actually water a little bit heavier. It's not like they're trying to flush, but they're trying to mimic nature where you get colder water, more rainy weather. And the challenge with nature is we don't want rain in the buds causing bud rot. And so genetic selection, depending on your outdoor environment, it's important. People that want them to go later when it might be wet, they usually cover because we want to grow it everywhere, right? Everybody wants to have this plant, not just where it's ideal to grow it. But when it comes to indoors, we have some control. And part of the BuildASoil way is to lower the time down to 11 hours instead of 12. Give it a little bit of that mimicry of like really lowering the DLI towards the end of the season because at the end of the season, it's cloudier, the weather's different, the sun's not quite as intense as it was in the middle of summer. And then the other thing that I notice is it gets cooler towards harvest time normally for these plants, so I like to mimic that. And a lot of people will use cold water and they won't be so concerned with it. Normally during phases of rapid growth, you want to have just regular water like would be rainwater, not ice cold because that can lower the nutrient uptake or kind of shock the soil. But rainwater is normally pretty cold, especially at the end of the season. So mimicking that's a great thing. But what doesn't usually happen is it doesn't usually get bone dry. And I feel like I am speeding up the drying process by getting the plant dry before I harvest it. And I would rather slow down the drying process by making sure that it's at least in a normal period of moisture when I harvest it. I don't want it to be excessively transpiring. I don't want it to lead to bud rot. I don't want to just have watered and then go try and harvest. But usually because it doesn't make sense, meaning once I harvest, the plants aren't drinking the water. I don't want to have waterlogged, soupy soil. So typically I'm not watering right at the end anyways, like the last few days. I don't water just because of that. But it's still full of water because the plants aren't really drinking it. So I keep up with normal watering. I treat it as per regular. And as they're drinking less, I water less, but I do not let it dry out and I do not waterlog it. However, at the end, I like to make sure I'm keeping up with cold water and kind of treating it like the end of its life. So hopefully that makes sense. I feel like I don't want to speed up the drying. I want it to be optimal and slow dry, and that includes the moisture percentage. Devlin, would an earth box do well outside? Devlin, yes, earth boxes do really well outside. Limiting factor here is the size of the container. You can set it up on a drip system where it automatically waters into the reservoir. The BuildASoil way is to let that reservoir dry before you fill it up, but outdoors, when the plants get growing, they're gonna drink so fast that as soon as they drink a little water in the morning, there'll be an air gap in there, and you can keep the dripper on once a day to fill the reservoir, or you can use a hose. A lot of times outdoors, I'll use one of those watering wands and I'll take the actual mist nozzle off, like the dram, and I'll literally have an open extendable hose and water really easily until I get runoff. So earth boxes work really well outside. Next is trellising. They can get pretty big in an earth box, and so whether you have a system around the earth boxes, there's people that grow hundreds of pounds of tomatoes by putting several earth boxes in a row and trellising the whole thing. You can do the same with your cannabis plants. I like earth boxes for outdoor. In fact, I just put some outdoor for myself for late season. like an end of July or end of June or a July planting. That way I'm confident that I'm not gonna overgrow the container. I can still mound and top dress if the plant gets big, but I get really, really good quality. And it's also dry here in Colorado. So having that reservoir kind of helps, and it helps me make it towards the end of the day before I have to water again if the plant gets really big. So earth boxes are great. Just be aware of the size limitation and be aware that if the plant gets really big in the little box and it gets a little dry, like you wanna have some sort of support. It's not anchored to the ground as well. If you're gonna plant early in it, it's going to limit the size of it a little bit, and you've got to be prepared to feed and water and keep up with that. So I would say just go with a bigger container for full season. Otherwise, Earthbox works really well for late season or maybe like not a full sun area, something like that. Next question, peace of mind farming. Peace of mind farming says, I have a 3.5 foot plant in vegetation that has a flat main stem near the top, much like the one you showed in quadrant 3 or 4. Will I be better off to let her grow it naturally or top it and see what comes of it? Yeah, I call that, I could be wrong, but I call it fasciation. It's almost like polyploidy. It's not always because of that, but there's some genetic issue where it's growing that flat stem. I don't have an exact answer for you. Part of me always wonders what it's gonna look like, so I just let it ride. But if you really are relying on this plant, it might be better just to top it and let the rest of the plant take over. Typically when I see this, I'd say 9 times out of 10, it's just one of the stalks and it's something strange. And I've seen it like in the hemp field where there was massive damage and then regrowth, and there was an issue there. But normally what I see is it's just from one particular seed and it seems to be genetic. Kind of like a whirling phyllotaxy, it seems to be that a lot of these outgrow their issue and they don't persist with it on every branch its entire life. But I could be wrong, so it's up to you. Kind of a personal question. If it were me, I'd probably leave it just to see what would happen, just because I'm curious like that. But you can do whatever you want and I'm sure you'll learn something from it. So good question. Cody says, I have a strain called Oreos. Throwing a fade on day 34, is that abnormal? Yes and no. So Oreos, I don't know. I've not ran that. It can be that some start to really change color in the 30s and 40s, and that senescence can start early on some plants. A lot of times though, if it's throwing a mean fade on day 34 and it looks like it's just getting started, I feel like maybe I missed out on a little bit of opportunity where it needed some nutrition. It could be from an overwatering, so it couldn't access it. It could be that the plant's getting bigger than its container. We just have to make sure that we're reading that, and it's better in a farming instance to listen to your plants than it is to say, well, I did everything right. Whatever the plant is telling you is probably real. When it comes to a fade, if it's starting from the bottom up and it looks like it's yellowing or getting a little bit like light in color, it might be better to use some amino acids, something that can give it some of that nitrogen without the soil needing to break it down, you know, that free energy. A lot of times what will happen is it's kind of like adding lighter fluid. That amino acid will now give it the nitrogen that it needed that it couldn't get. That'll lower the limiting factor to the point where now nitrogen's not the problem. Now it can utilize with its new energy all the other stuff that it needed to work for, like the calcium and other things in the soil. So hopefully that takes care of it. And usually what I do is I just follow the less is more with amino acids. Instead of doing like a tablespoon per gallon, I'll do like a teaspoon per gallon in flour. And I'll do it once, I'll look at the plants the next day. If I'm seeing a positive reaction, I'll do it again. And I want the color to kind of come back. And a lot of times you can totally steer them clear of having a lesser yield because it started to fade early. Otherwise, you're still gonna have great quality. It may not be as abundant. A good fade's not a terrible issue, but I want you to be aware of why. If it feels heavy and overwatered, that could be why. If it feels like you're doing everything right, and it's just fading, it could be that it is the plant size versus the container size, and it might be just outpacing the biology. But I guess what I'm getting at is there are more than one reasons why. So abnormal, it's tough to say. Beyond day 30, some plants, if they're gonna finish in the 50s, right? We're talking 8 weeks. And so it could be day 56 and you're already at day 34, 20 days away, they might start some of that fade right at that time and still be pumping. This NL5 last time was fading like the whole way and it pumped out really good yield and it actually turned into a rainbow of colors. And so sometimes genetics can be slightly lighter in color, and as you get more experience, I think you'll be able to tell the difference. But I would not be scared to use some amino acids right now. Grab them at the local garden store, grab something from us. Just a general like 1600, 1400 amino acid is what they call those. And although they're nitrogen, it's a very readily available nitrogen that's great for flowering too in small amounts. Plants need it. Okay, last question here is Joel. Joel says, so is it official? 18 hours is the way to go with autoflowers. I think it's official. The yield was gonna be significantly better over there had we just dialed in the environment and treated it accordingly. 18 hours would have been better as far as it comes to yield. The odors, the greasiness to it was phenomenal. So it's not like it made a huge difference in my opinion, saying like, oh, 12 hours could have been better quality. I really think that DLI is probably most important there, and environment being important. A couple things we did in that 4x4 tent, because it was an extra at the end. Not enough airflow, too much heat. That too much heat causes a little bit of tip burn, but the yield and quality was still up in comparison. So had we done it right, I would have expected really big things out of that 18-hour 4x4, and I'm pretty sad that we didn't do it justice, but I think everyone got the point. I will tell you, they're in my mind now. And I took one of the packs home that was extra that Daz gave to me, and I'm definitely gonna pop them at home at some point. And I would have never done that before this experience. So I think we made some headway. Also, we do have a couple other extra packs. I think they're right here. And so it's possible that when we're done with this whole thing, to wrap up the season, maybe we'll do a giveaway. Talk to Daz, maybe we can get a little bit more going on it instead of just this last pack or two that I have here. But it's been a really fun season. I learned a lot from this. I love answering your questions. And it's clear that we have a lot more questions that are unanswered from the FAQ4 from season 3, as season 3 was in the heart of busy season. So I'm leaving town right now. When I come back, I'm gonna do more smoke reports. I'll give that a little jar time on everything that was hanging. I promise to follow up with more information to close out season 3 as far as the actual smoke report. And then we're gonna start planning season 4. And I'm really excited about it because season 4 is gonna lead itself into a really good time of the year for a good harvest. I also wanna start the vegetable 10x10. Lots to do, lots to see. What do you guys wanna see for season 4? We've got a lot of opportunity. We can run some of the moms from the last time. We have some of the male plants that we never really discussed, as we're running pretty high plant numbers this last season, and I think we'll keep it a little more mellow. There's opportunity, okay? We got 4 quadrants. I'll do anything that you guys wanna see. I've got some of the beefcake D-moms. I'd love to maybe give that a go again. We can pop some new seeds. I can do another autoflower run. We can run the coots from clone and do 1 cut, see what we can do yield-wise, or maybe give them a little bit better run for their money. I want you all to be a part of this. So if you've got some input for me, something that you've really wanted to see, now is gonna be a great opportunity for you to put it in the comments here so that I can review these. We'll discuss this a little more, but I'd like to make a decision within the next 30 days or so that we can kick off this next round. Shoot, I'd like to make a decision in the next 2 to 3 weeks, because I'd like to kick this one off in August. It's July right now. And I'd like to really have a good plan that we all can get excited about, since it'll be the 4th season. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next episode.